Welcome back. I'm Lisa Dregney, Long-Term Care Planning and Insurance Advisor with Yorkshire Insurance Advisors. Thanks for joining me for this video addressing the unique benefits of funding your long-term care plan with long-term care insurance. Over the years of working with many families and talking with long-term care facility staff, I've realized that the decision to consider long-term care insurance is not only a financial one, but more importantly, one that can truly help protect your long-term care plan, as well as the financial, emotional, and physical well-being of your loved ones in ways you've likely never thought about before. Since it's the most commonly understood solution long-term care insurance offers, let's start with the financial benefits it can provide your family. When you invest in long-term care insurance, you're leveraging the premium paid for a much larger long-term care benefit. This allows you to help cover the cost of your long-term care plan whenever it might happen, whether that's tomorrow or 30 years from now. Many of my clients are in a financial position to cover their cost of long-term care if it happens in their mid-80s, but not if it were to happen today or in their mid to late 90s. I also find that there are very well-intentioned individuals and couples where their financial plan is based on a level of expenses they hope to limit themselves to in retirement, which would allow for funding of their long-term care plan by themselves, but realistically, they aren't going to adhere to it long-term. Investing in a long-term care insurance policy can help ensure that overspending in retirement doesn't affect the ability to fund their long-term care plan, and thus protecting each other's plan and their loved ones. In summary, investing in long-term care insurance can provide financial security not only to your long-term care plan, but also your entire financial plan that self-funding with assets and income may not be able to. Now I'd like to discuss some of the non-financial benefits admittedly I didn't even think about when I first started helping families with their long-term care plans, but they're equally as important to consider as the financial benefits. I think the most important non-financial benefit long-term care insurance offers is how it gives permission for both you and your loved ones to get professional help for your care. As discussed in a previous video, we often start planning for a long-term care event at a point where our capacity for logical thinking is pretty high. And therefore, our first inclination often is to assume we don't need long-term care insurance if we have assets and income to cover our care whenever needed. We don't think about how in our 80s or 90s we'll likely be much more apprehensive about change, conservative with our spending, fearful and distrustful of others, and often are too proud to ask for help. It is not uncommon for a spouse to provide care well past when he or she should, simply because they can't stomach the idea of spending thousands a month on care and seeing their assets dwindle quickly. Or he or she thinks if they do, they will run out of money and not have enough for him or herself later, whether that's actually true or not. Another common situation, especially for a spouse caregiver, is that they intended to just provide care initially, but over time finds themselves consumed with their loved one's care without perhaps realizing it, which most often has a significant negative effect on him or her both emotionally and physically. If they had long-term care insurance, however, the thought of wasting any of the policy benefit they spent a significant amount of money on usually is motivation enough to get the help they need early on before the scenario can happen. It also shows a non-spouse caregiver that their loved one planned for professional care by investing in a policy, and therefore can be relieved of any guilt they may feel for not being able to give up their life to provide care. If you happen to be a single individual who chose to start your care plan in independent living, I'm told from facility staff that having long-term care insurance really helps residents accept the transition from independent living to assisted living within the same campus, which greatly improves their level of care and safety. Although the emotional part of making that transition is significant, the cost difference is typically that biggest barrier. Another non-financial solution long-term care insurance funding can provide is potentially a higher quality of care when you need it. The goal is that your long-term care plan will be followed when needed, but that plan may not have had a specific facility or home care agency identified yet. That means that your spouse or healthcare power of attorney is likely going to make this decision for you with finances in mind. It's just human nature. Having a long-term care policy with a sufficient benefit for your plan, however, gives your loved ones permission to get the best care possible since there's clearly funding for it that would otherwise be wasted. I have heard from multiple long-term care placement agencies that finances is the biggest factor in picking the care their loved one receives. With respect to home care, families will often hire a caregiver for 8 hours a week, for example, when the company knows very well that their loved ones needs much more than that to meet their needs. If the benefit's there, however, they'll use it and will subsequently help avoid any feelings of guilt the decision maker might have had for choosing sub-quality care solely to save money. The final and unfortunately most important reason to seriously consider funding your long-term care plan with insurance is to protect your plan from abuse. I wish I could say this were a rare occurrence, but it happens much more than you'd think by those trusted powers of attorney we wouldn't necessarily expect would ever take advantage of us. We discussed earlier how when your powers of attorney have control of your finances, they often start viewing them as their own, and it's human nature to want to protect it, especially if they're also the beneficiary of the assets. If you've chosen to self-fund your long-term care plan, you're more subject to these individuals choosing substandard care to save money, outright stealing from you, which may not allow enough funds for the care you planned on, or withholding care altogether. A client I met with a few years ago shared with me that a family member of theirs was accepted into a very nice private pay-only assisted living facility that accepts only residents they expect to have sufficient assets of their own to stay there long enough through end of life. The son was the power of attorney, and unfortunately, he took it upon himself to use Dad's assets to cover personal expenses, and in less than 2 years, Dad was unexpectedly out of money and had to go on Medicaid. Since the facility he was in was private pay only and did not accept Medicaid, he had to be moved to another facility that would accept him miles away. There are very few facilities that accept someone that is starting off with 0 assets on Medicaid like this gentleman, so this was a heartbreaking situation for everyone. Had he purchased a long-term care policy, a traditional one specifically, that covered his long-term care expenses at the nice facility, he would have been able to stay since there would be no cash value for the son to liquidate, and his plan would have been protected. On the positive side, I've also seen trusted individuals go out of their way to ensure their loved ones are cared for the best way possible and are very trustworthy with their finances. But we don't always know what's going on in their lives that might make it tempting to make poor choices and therefore need to at least consider the possibility within the long-term care plan. Although not everyone can afford nor qualify for long-term care insurance, it's important to at least evaluate this option within your long-term care and overall financial plans to see if it might be the best option to meet your long-term care plan goals of choice of care, protect your loved ones, and protect your plan of care. I hope to see you shortly for the last video highlighting the next steps for how to start your long-term care plan. I'll see you then.